Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I'm Thomas Vick, joined by Seth Wilson of Adler Attorneys. Seth, how are you today?
Thomas, I am doing wonderful. It's a nice, warm June afternoon here in central Indiana, so enjoying the sunshine.
Yes, for sure. I think it's supposed to be 90, 95 degrees, something like that this weekend. Very, very warm, but I'll take it. I enjoy the hot weather. So, um,
The, my only complaint is we seem to skip spring and go straight to summer, but
that's right.
it's better than the alternative, I suppose. So
Yeah, yep. There's no in between. The blog digest went out this morning, and it had some topics that we wanted to discuss today. The first one was, how do I talk to my parents about estate planning? Uh, you know, you and I both have parents that are older, so we can kind of relate to this situation. And so, but it can be difficult sometimes to, talk about this end of life situation and to have a polite conversation, but a needed conversation with them. So uh, let me defer to you first. And how would you go about that topic with your parents?
Well, I think I'd call you and have you do the conversation for me is probably
Oh,
the,
thank you.
the first. No, but I think what I've come to realize over time is one, if you're going to have that conversation, I mean, it's on your mind, and you're starting to think through. Maybe you've just done your estate plan, and you know how important it is because you've now received or done some research and gotten some more knowledge as to what needs to be done, and recognize the importance of what an estate plan can do for you and your family. And so I think as you think through that, a good way to start is asking questions and or sharing the story of, recently I attended a funeral, and we were talking about the craziness that may have happened because the individual who passed did not have an estate plan in place, or it was so nice and everybody wasn't stressed because they did have a plan in place, and use some of the stories and questions as a way to open up the dialogue rather than coming in and saying, hey, you got to do this and this, but engaging him in that process. So I think asking questions is probably a big start for me. How about you?
Yeah, asking questions, and I would probably say, and this is kind of getting to a little bit of a biblical perspective, but if you feel like there's a need for your parents to have an estate plan, well, what about yourself first? Do you have an estate plan? And then that could kind of be a springboard for, hey, I did my estate plan, and this is what I did. This is the attorney that I used. This is how I went about it. And these issues were addressed in that process. And mom and dad, what are you doing about that kind of thing? That might be a good way of approaching it and opening up the topic is, making sure that you have your particular house in order first so that you can kind of move on and bridge that gap between you and your parents.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, kind of filling yourself up first and then serving them out of the overflow.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So that's one thing, and I echo what you said earlier about perhaps you have had a situation where maybe uh, the adult child has been part of an estate administration on the other side of the family. Maybe a spouse's family had a death, and then they had an experience with an estate or trust administration. Again, that's an opportunity. That's a topic to address with them. Um, and a lot of times I see that health circumstances. If there is a health scare, that's should kind of scare you into getting that topic addressed, and saying, well, what would happen if we weren't able to pay bills for you, mom, or weren't able to talk to the doctor, dad? What would you want to see happen, and do you have the documents in place so that we could do that? I think those are maybe some ways that you could start that conversation.
Yeah, and it's sometimes easier to broach that topic with that current or during life disability rather than thinking about what happens after I pass, which is sort of part and parcel of putting together a complete estate plan, but you don't have to discuss all of that at the same time. You could talk about hey, if you weren't able to write checks or pay bills, how would you want to authorize somebody to do that for you through a power of attorney or help with making those medical decisions, and kind of get that door open to having a more complete discussion at some point.
Right. And, the clearest thing that I tell clients, and it kind of piques their attention, is if you don't do a power of attorney, then your kids are going to have to ask permission from a judge to be able to take care of you. And they're like, "Oh, I don't want that." And of course they don't. And it's so much easier to do a simple power of attorney document and advance directive to avoid that situation. So those are some points to maybe bring up to broach the topic with a person's parents.
Yeah, I think too, I think your article mentioned this as well, is if there's a family friend that can help maybe have that discussion as well, where maybe it's better coming from a peer versus a child. If that's part of your relationship, it might be a good idea to bring someone along or have a get together and kind of have those individuals in the room, so to speak, and make sure that the topic of conversation gets around to that at some point. It can be a good way to do that. And but yeah, ultimately just starting to ask those questions and recognize, I think, that maybe the first time you bring it up, it doesn't go the way you might think it goes, but you planted a seed and allowed that to develop over time. And then maybe the second or third time, there's some more interest there because mom and dad have kind of gotten their thinking around it a little bit as well.
Right, right. Well, another topic that we had in the blog digest today was, why should I put my home in a trust? And there are several reasons for that. One might be we want to make sure that the house goes to a particular individual at a certain time. I'm just kind of thinking of examples on the fly here. It might be that a grandparent wants a particular piece of real estate to go into, or maybe the principal residence to go to a grandchild, but the grandchild isn't of age yet, and so it needs to be the house needs to be placed into a trust for a period of time to, sort of be preserved for that grandchild to eventually take ownership of it. I mean, we can maybe go back and forth with some reasons to put a house into a trust, but that's maybe one of them.
Yeah, I think another one is just in interest of making sure that goal with a trust is to avoid probate. You've taken care of typically one of the larger assets in an estate plan, which is a residence or a piece of real estate. And that transfer of ownership at the time, funding it into the trust, make sure that the trust is in control and ownership of that item so that there's no additional step required if the first spouse passes away, for example, and the surviving spouse is then directed by the trust to place it in the trust at that time, or something happens to both individuals at the same time. And if there wasn't a transfer on death deed, then you're in a probate situation because the trust didn't own it. So I think just kind of an interest of completion of the plan and the funding piece of the puzzle, that's another good reason to go ahead and put it into a trust at that time. And one thing I always know with my clients is if you do that, make sure that you contact your homeowner's insurance policy and name your trust as an additional insured, so that there's no question there that the ownership of the policy and the policy proceeds then apply to the trust, who is the legal owner of the house at that point.
Yes, definitely a word of wisdom there regarding contacting the homeowner's insurance. Another reason, in particular, with regard to revocable trusts, is you can maintain control of it. You get the benefit of probate, but then you also get the benefit of maintaining control. And of course, we respect each one's individual liberty and decision making, and so you're not giving up any control if you put the house into a revocable trust. And so that's another reason why you would want to put the house into a trust. Um, and with regard to avoiding probate, one of the reasons why you would want to avoid probate in Indiana is because if you have a probate estate and the decedent is age 55 or over, then you got to notify Indiana FSSA with regard to Medicaid estate recovery. And so there's a potential claim against the house that you have to notify the potential claimant of. And so that's another reason why you would want to try to avoid probate if you can. And that could be a big one for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the kind of the concept of how you relate to the house. So if you put it in a trust, you are being a steward of that asset versus being the owner of that. And it can change your approach to that, recognizing that you're more to be shepherding or stewarding this asset while it's in your care, custody, and control versus you're the owner. And kind of taking that mindset and putting it in the right relationship can be helpful as well. That it's a tool, it's an option, to use to build your family and your friends and maybe your church network as well.
Yep, yep. And then one note that I would say, since I kind of brought up the Medicaid topic, with Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, you can put the principal residence into that asset protection trust and maintain the exemption, homestead exemption, and continue to live at the house. And, it really doesn't affect one's day-to-day life. It doesn't really matter whose name is on the deed necessarily, for person to continue to live in their own house. But it starts the 5-year look back period to eventually, get the house protected and doesn't have to be spent down, put up for sale or rent when it comes to applying for Medicaid. So that's another reason to put it into a trust. This is a different kind of trust, an asset protection trust. But that's a reason to put it into a trust, is to protect assets in view of Medicaid. And you have to make the distinction. We're not talking about a revocable trust. We're talking about a particular kind of Medicaid asset protection trust. But that can be a way to do some estate planning for an individual.
Yeah, and it's again one of those scenarios that is very fact dependent, and so it's really helpful, I think, to reach out to someone like Thomas and get those questions answered about does my scenario support that type of planning? Does it make sense? Is there a good outcome that we can do here to make sure that we're being good stewards of the assets we've been placed with? So good stuff, Thomas. Really appreciate that thought on the different types of trusts and how that works. So, hey, it's always good chatting with you. Where can people find you?
The best place to find me is going to vicklaw.org, and you can book a call and get in touch with me. You can talk to me by phone or by Zoom, however you want to do it, or schedule an initial consultation by contacting me by phone. So vicklaw.org is the best way to get in touch with me. How about you, Seth?
Well, we're here in the heart of Hamilton County in Noblesville, Indiana, and you can find us at noblesvilleattorney.com.
All right. Well, another one in the books. Appreciate it as always, Seth, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good, Thomas. Thanks.